The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
They may be drinkers, Robin, but they're also human beings.
Hell yeah, let's get Stinko.
From Marshalltown, Iowa, and from Tampa, Florida, this is the Giles and the Goalies podcast. I am Giles Farrell. Across the Skype machine is Ben Remington.
Hello.
And Ben, how is the weather in lovely Florida?
I don't mean to chap any hides here, but it's actually a little bit cooler than I would have expected. It's only about 50 degrees out, so it's chilly t-shirt weather if you are a native Minnesotan, or it's full-on tundra expedition weather if you're a native Floridian.
It's cold up here, like 20s, but
right.
Not stereotypical Minnesota weather. You're negative 20 degrees and blizzarding and whatnot, but I don't like it cold. I just don't. I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's be a weather podcast.
We could probably do that. I feel like that's something we could pull off. You can still argue about soup, but just in the realm of, is it cold enough to eat soup yet?
True. Well, we're going to get to soup a little later with our guests.
Oh, jeez.
Soup is always a good question, so it's a good cold weather thing to eat. Few promo things here before we jump into our show today. If you missed it last week, we are on iHeartRadio now. Check us out there. Just search Giles and the Goalie. We are also on SoundCloud. For those of you, I know many of you love to listen to your podcasts on SoundCloud. You can find us there on SoundCloud. Search Giles and the Goalie. Pretty simple. Also, we are going to have a Festivus-themed show.
Yeah.
Close to that time. Details still being worked out, but maybe in the next week or so, check for when that's going to happen, and we will open up our phone lines and emails and Twitter boxes to you to air out your grievances. So please check that out in the coming week and change.
I'm looking forward to that. That should be a lot of fun to let people to do a live call-in radio show for the first time ever. We haven't interacted with the fans as much as we interact with them on the Twitters. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, it's weird interacting with people in real life and not on Twitter.com.
Tell me about it. Hashtag millennial.
Yes, that is peak millennial right there. So, it was a kind of a short week here for the Minnesota Wild, or at least as we record. We are recording before Sunday night's game against San Jose, because let's face it, we're not trying to stay up that late and record a podcast post-game.
Yeah.
So we only have 2 games to get over this week, the first of which came on Tuesday when the Wild played in Los Angeles at Staples Center. The Wild held a 2-1 lead, I believe. Mm-hmm. Goals from Charlie Coyle and Tyler Ennis. Unbelievable. And in the third period, the wheels completely fell off as Marian Gaborik scored twice, and then Anze Kopitar added an empty net goal for good measure, and the Kings win 5-2. And if you checked in post-game, holy moly, did it look like the world was on fire, according to Wild Twitter, and maybe justifiably so, because that was completely awful in the third period, that the Wild just let another game in the third slip away. I want to say that's their 7th or 8th instance this year where they've had a lead or been tied in the third and just have straight not gotten a point out of it.
Yeah, but the weird thing is that, especially early in the season. I don't know how much it holds true right now, but they've been a good third period team as well. Like, it's been a weird dichotomy where they've come back and won games in the third period, which we almost never saw from this hockey club before last season. And then they've had other nights where they just completely fall apart, I think. I mean, it still comes down to not giving a 60-minute effort, but it's just weird how they've kind of lived and died in the third period this year. Like, the third period used to be kind of like a more boring period, and then they'd give you the 3 minutes of hope at the end of the game and end up losing instead of, stuff like this.
It's really more they've died in the third period. They've not lived and died. They've just straight died in the third period.
No, I mean, they have had some good third period comes back, though. I mean, they have, like I said, maybe it was earlier in the season that I'm thinking of, and they haven't been able to pull it off much as late. But I feel like earlier in the season they did have some good third periods, and actually won some games they were behind in the third period somehow, some way.
Marian Gaborik scored his 400th career goal. That was his second goal, which was a deflection off of Matt Dumba, and Wild Twitter appropriately blamed Dumba for just apparently, standing there.
Right.
And, there's definitely a little bit of irony or whatnot with Gaborik scoring his 400th goal against the Wild. And boy, it's almost been 10 years since Marian Gaborik left Minnesota, and there is still a bit of vitriol out there, as I found on Twitter.com, for Marian Gaborik, which, I guess, get over it. I mean, like, I get it. Like, you wanted him to stay, but it was clear he wasn't going to stay. And, the Wild kind of got unlucky as he got hurt at the period of the trade deadline in his last year, and they couldn't trade him and get anything, so he had to leave via free agency. And just another lovely note in the Doug Risebrough era of Minnesota Wild hockey. But get over it.
I don't think that, and you went back to Wild Twitter burning after the Kings game. Wild Twitter isn't a good barometer of anything sane, I will say. You know what I mean? It's entertaining for sure. And don't get me wrong, I love Wild Twitter, and I feed into a lot of the fun that Wild Twitter has in that regard sometimes. But I also don't think that should be regarded as any rational person's opinion at the same time. You know what I mean? Like, if you're not happy for Marian Gaborik and accomplishing what he's accomplished in this league, and you don't understand why he left, I mean, we know the Risebrough era Wild were a sinking ship, and I just don't know.
Yeah, he saw the writing on the wall.
I don't know how you blame a guy for that.
No, and I noted on Twitter that night, it's given his injury history, it's great accomplishment for him to get 400 goals, and if he hadn't been so hurt all the time, he would be closer to 500 goals, if not, there. And so it was good to see him, get to 400, and I believe the Kings have him signed for the next 20 years, so he might get to 500 still. Who knows?
Yeah.
So after the game, the following day, the Minnesota Wild made a roster move as they recalled Joel Eriksson Ek from Iowa, and he had registered 7 points in 7 games with the Iowa Wild since his demotion. And they called him up on Tuesday, or no, it was Wednesday. Called him up on Wednesday, and they didn't practice till Thursday because they had the day off Wednesday, so everyone got to relax in lovely Southern California. And then Thursday,
plenty of pictures from all of the various people that cover the team.
Yeah, everyone made sure to tweet out a photo of them golfing or something. So Thursday they get to practice, and we see Joel Eriksson Ek gets put back on a line with Chris Stewart and Tyler Ennis. And I noted that why would you recall a player who you sent down to build confidence in Iowa, and you put him on a line with the two least useful players on your roster right now.
Right.
Like, why would you do that? Like, that just... And I credited our friend Tony from Hockey Wilderness, who was barking up this tree long, long ago before Eriksson Ek was being sent down. But don't just bury him on a line with, two guys who he has to carry. Give him a chance.
Right.
Put him on a line with somebody who he can contribute with.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, not that I'm like... that they need to bring up Luke Cunnin right away. I understand Cunnin, probably had similar confidence issues, and he hasn't rebounded in Iowa the way that Eriksson Ek did. But at least give Eriksson Ek, Coyle to work with. At least give him something. I mean, anything. You've got Ennis. You've got one of the two. Whatever. Like they don't have the depth right now to not put kind of a lower tier player on the third line just because that's where their depth is at until Parise comes back. But at least give him Charlie Coyle to work with. Coyle's just kind of floating out there on his own. At least give him that. I mean, Coyle I guess is on the stall line, but give him something, anything to work with.
Right. That just frustrating, and typically. I don't, question Bruce Boudreau's line decisions, but there I'm just kind of going, why are you doing this? Give the kid a chance, and I know you're trying to jumpstart any kind of productivity from your bottom six because Lord knows there is none. But my goodness, try something else besides putting a 20-year-old rookie in there to try and do it.
Right.
Joel Eriksson Ek isn't, an Connor McDavid offensive juggernaut.
Right.
That's not what he's going to be. So, infuriating. So before
I think when it comes to line deployment like that, and not to defend Boudreau, because I understand your point completely, but I think a lot of deployment and why so many people like us, bloggers, if you will, have issues with deployments is because NHL coaches more often than not are just throwing stuff against a wall and seeing what'll stick. It's just kind of this mad guessing game, and I don't know, there just doesn't seem to be a ton of logic behind it at times, until they find something that works. Granlund Koivu-Zucker works, so he sticks with it. But other than that, it just a lot of times it seems very nonsensical.
So the other game we get to review this week was the Minnesota Wild were in Anaheim Friday night at the Arrowhead Pond in Anaheim. I'm sorry, Honda Center. It's like I'm living in the past. And as we still await the retirement of number 9 in the rafters, the Wild played the Ducks, and it was a 3-2 win in overtime for the Minnesota Wild. And the goal scorer in overtime was... Are you ready for this?
Yeah.
This fellow's name was Matt Dumba.
Oh, wow. Imagine that.
Let me repeat. The name of the overtime goal scorer was Matt Dumba.
Matt Damon. Yeah, funny how that happens. Dumba actually provides some points for the team, and then the play. I didn't catch this game because I was traveling that night. But it's a pretty dynamic play. I saw the game-winning goal, obviously, and that was a fun play right there. That's what 3-on-3 hockey should be for the Minnesota Wild, right? That's exactly what you want to see out on the ice. You want to see Dumba out on the ice creating. You want to see, him making a dynamic play to win the hockey game. I mean, he walked the entire Ducks team out there. Granted, it's 3 guys, but he walked all of them, and it was just that's what you want. That's what you want to see. That's what we've been craving for 3-on-3. And don't look now, but he's got 2 overtime goals this year in a row, I believe. The 2 overtime goals they played, right?
Yeah, and back-to-back weeks he's got overtime goal.
and he's up to 14 points in the season. You know, he got to a really slow start. We know that. That obviously, you know, lent fuel to the dumpster fire that is Matt Dumba internet takes. But, you know, he's rebounded rather nicely, and he's got 14 points. It's good for 7th on the team, and 1 point behind the pairing of Suter and Spurgeon. So, you know, don't look now, but he's had a pretty good month, and he's, you know, might actually be able to contribute to this hockey team. Don't at me.
As I pointed out to you Friday night, the year of Dumba finally has begun. Maybe a little later, but it finally begun, and I guess that my takeaway from the game was the Wild are deploying different players in overtime now. They're deploying the players you want to see out there.
Right.
And, you know, yeah, Koivu, Suter, et al., they still got their shifts, but, you know,
Right.
I think maybe there was some kind of a come-to-Jesus meeting with them, because I paid very close attention to them, and, you know, they got off the ice when they needed to get off the ice, and, you know, that was something we really vented about a couple of weeks ago, was the fact that these guys just don't get off the ice in overtime. Or maybe they listened to this podcast and it finally hit home to them. I don't know.
We showed them the error of their ways.
Yeah. When they need to get their game going, they listen to the Giles and the Goalie podcast.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the case. So, to my point that I just brought up, the point scorers for the Wild since November 1st. Here's the list. Zucker, obviously. Granlund, who had a fine month. Eric Stahl, we talked about having a great season so far. Nino Niederreiter, who was a good hockey boy. And Matt Dumba.
That's a good list.
5th on the team in scoring, not in the last month exactly, but the last 5 weeks, let's say, since November 1st.
But turnovers.
Yeah, and don't get and that's the thing that I think, you know, we should clarify a little bit. You and I are very acutely aware of Dumba's turnovers and his strengths and weaknesses. You don't follow a team this closely and cover a team this closely and are not we don't think that Dumba can do no wrong. Don't get us wrong on that. It's just
we don't think he's perfect.
The amount of vitriol, like you said, that is out there for Matt Dumba is just it borders on silly. It's just yeah, he's going to turn over the puck sometimes. You know, as we've pointed out a gazillion times, so does Brent Burns. So does Erik Karlsson. You just have to take that with somebody who's that dynamic offensively from the defensive position.
Did you see that the Senators are now possibly considering moving on from Karlsson because of his comments on his potential new contract in which he will not take a pay cut?
Right. Well, yeah, he's not going to take a discount. He's not going to take a hometown discount, and you don't blame him. Why would he? I mean, it's Ottawa. It's not like, you know, they've been super. I mean, he almost single-handedly carried that team into the Eastern Conference Finals last year.
He had them in overtime away from the Stanley Cup final.
Yeah, I don't blame him at all. And by the same token, it's very par for the course that Eugene Melnyk kind of flips his lid about it, and now they're overreacting. But you know what? Fine, let him go. Let him go somewhere else. And,
right. It's as if
what happens when you have bad ownership.
It's as if he woke up and was like, "Gee, I'm the best defenseman in the world. I want to be paid as such."
God forbid I'm paid like it.
Anyway, back to the Wild. So the conclusion of the road trip will come in San Jose, which is, as we're recording tonight, Sunday night. But obviously, you know, we're recording before the game, so we can't really, you know, recap or have any takeaways. So check back with us next week, and we'll have a recap of that, as I'm sure it'll be a disappointing one as always from the Shark Tank, as the Wild seem to always let one slip away there.
Right. Well, yeah, Staleck's in net tonight, so the last time we saw him was not a good showing, not a good game for the whole team, but he obviously was a part of that. So very interested to see how he bounces back against his former team. Should be an interesting game. Sharks are playing fairly well right now, so they're obviously always a dangerous team, and the Wild on the West Coast, I don't think we need to expound on that too much.
So kind of looking ahead this week, the Wild have a full week ahead. As we already mentioned, they have San Jose tonight, concluding their Western road trip. Then they head out, or they head home for 3 games, all of which come against Canadian teams. They have Calgary Tuesday, Toronto on Thursday, and then Edmonton on Saturday. And then they close out the week on Sunday night at Chicago. Always a game in which the fans get going, because the Blackhawks seem to, make everyone fired up for whatever reason.
It's always fun when the Wild get to visit Chicago, the state of hockey.
Oh, God. That's still a thing on Twitter. When the Wild and Blackhawks, it's still a thing. It's just like, somebody just let it go. Like, honestly, let's just get over it. Like, I suppose I'm not one to say move on from something, as I continuously live in the past. But I don't know. Find something else. Just let's continue to call out somebody's stupidity.
Yeah, I mean, and not to mention it's just a troll job, so don't fall for troll jobs.
Wild Twitter is so prone to falling for troll jobs.
I know. Yep. Fun stuff.
But anyway, I mean, this is going to be maybe another telling week, but I feel like I say that every week now, where it's like, yeah, they've got a win-win-win here, and you're playing a good Calgary team. Toronto is, one of the best teams in the league. Edmonton is a tire fire, so you got a winnable game there, and then you got the Blackhawks, who are kind of, struggling themselves. The Wild and Chicago have been pretty much tied in points this year at the bottom of the Central Division, which is very hard to believe, but that's where they both are. And Chicago would be in a lot worse place if Corey Crawford hadn't absolutely saved their bacon early on this year.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like that we keep saying that every week because they keep just kind of treading water. And so you're hoping to see like some kind of sign out of them, like some kind of, reinforcement that they're either bad or they're good, and we still aren't getting it. So it's been extremely frustrating. I understand why you keep saying that, because it's like, yeah, we don't know what this team is, and that's probably the most frustrating thing of all.
So yeah, that's the week ahead here. A lot of games coming up before the Christmas break, and really before the end of the month, as there's just not a whole lot of days off, and very little time to practice. And if the Wild have some problems, which will probably happen, they're not going to have a lot of time to work on it. They got to figure it out during games. And
yeah,
here we are mid-December, and the Wild are very, very far from being a good team, and that just worries me because problems always seem to creep up. So I'm a little reserved about what's coming ahead for this team.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I don't know. I feel like there's still enough reasons to be positive. We're not halfway through the season yet. And as much as people count on a swoon happening, so you want to build that swoon cushion, as we've coined it before, if they don't swoon, it only takes a moderately healthy winning streak for them to kind of get into better shape. And then that's kind of where I'm at with it. Not to be overly positive, because I don't think there's a lot when you watch this team on some nights to be overly positive about, but I'm just kind of, I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop, but in sort of a good way. Like it can't continue to be this bad for the entire season. Like it could get worse, I suppose, and maybe that would be better, because that would kind of eliminate a lot of unnecessary emotions. But
right.
I don't know. This is kind of where I'm at.
So yeah, everything is roses, Wild fans. We are so enthused with where they're going.
Right. Just tickled pink.
All right, on to our Bruce Boudreau quote of the week.
Hi, this is Bruce Boudreau. I don't see how in Toronto that they're calling it, unless it's a guy they just pulled in off the street that hasn't seen hockey before. If I were the fans, I'd be booing even more, because that, they pay good money for this.
If you want it, don't just think you want it. Go out and f***ing want it.
So last week, as you may have heard or not heard, we ran into some audio problems, go figure, and we ended up losing our Bruce Boudreau quote of the week.
Right.
So just quickly to kind of rehash those quotes. On the return of prodigal son Nate Prosser, Bruce Boudreau said, "It's like going to college and not seeing your buddy for 10 years and getting right back in and not missing a beat. That's what Prosser is to this group." And that more just kind of played into our Nate Prosser discussion. And then the second question came after the Wild's overtime win last week against, I can't remember who it was, because we didn't quite know the context of this, and then I've later figured it out. It was following the first Matt Dumba overtime goal, which was against St. Louis. Bruce Boudreau was asked about, kind of maybe using a little bit different deployment in overtime, and that's when he replied that they went to the analytics department and gave them kudos for making some changes that have worked out for the better, as we've seen. The Wild are now 2-0 in overtime, and you don't usually see a coach kind of openly pat the analytics department on the back, and we kind of went a little bit more in depth on the analytics discussion, but
yeah. Well, what we thought it was the Kyle Quincy move.
Right. That's that.
Which, thank God, it's not that, because as I said last week, which was lost, was you shouldn't need an analytics department to tell you that Kyle Quincy is bad.
Both eye test and analytics say Kyle Quincy is
right.
god awful.
If your eye test says that Kyle Quincy is good, you need to see your optometrist. So, but I mean, I guess I have the same attitude about the overtime thing. Like, I don't know. It seems like Wild fans, like you and I, have been saying for many years, hey, maybe you should put some of those fast kids out on the ice for 3-on-3 overtime. And I don't know. I don't like to think of Boudreau as a very stuck in his ways kind of coach, but it's just like, how hard is it to... You shouldn't need an analytics department to tell you that you should put fast players on the ice for 3-on-3 overtime.
Probably by the time the NHL gets their tracking system that they have upcoming the next couple of years going, Boudreau will probably no longer be with the Wild. His coaches seemingly have a short shelf life, so
sure.
Yeah, it shouldn't take an analytics department to say, hey, maybe you should put your quick, creative players out on the ice over your your old war horses who need to be put to pasture.
Well, I have a great appreciation for what Mikko Koivu can do in a 5-on-5 setting. Don't get me wrong, but I just don't think that translates well to 3-on-3, and I don't think that that's that harsh of a criticism. It's just not the player that he is.
Right. That's not his game.
Right.
So anyway, our actual quote for this week of Bruce Boudreau, he was asked by the media before heading out on the 3-game road trip to California on what he hopes to get out of this trip, and he said, bluntly, 6 points.
Well, 2 down, 4 to go somehow.
Yes. Hoping for the all-important 4-point game against the Sharks tonight.
Yeah, I don't know. I think they're looking for something more specific, but yeah, I mean, it like I said before, it's really kind of getting to that time with the Wild where it's like you should probably go on some kind of winning streak or you might not make the playoffs. So I can understand the pressure from him. Like, it probably feels like they need to reel off 12 games straight like they did last December just to kind of really, be in that top 3 in the division.
What a great time that was in that 12-game winning streak.
Oh, it was amazing.
What a time to be alive.
I was just excited when they won the 10th game so me and Panda Pete could use all the Ty Dillinger gifts we could find.
I don't know what that is. I think I know what it is, but anyway. So that was our Bruce Boudreau quote of the last 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And now we will move on to our lovely guest. Joining us on Giles and the Goalie podcast today from most notably The Athletic and also Hockey Wilderness is Brandon Slag. Brandon, how's it going, man?
It's going all right. Game night. It's been a while.
It's also Star Wars night. Do you have any scathing Star Wars takes for us before we dive into it?
Everybody hates on Jar Jar Binks, and I'm part of that as well. As far as the debate between what's a better movie, Empire or Jedi, Empire. Empire hands down for me.
I would agree to that. Ben isn't a movie guy, so I don't get to talk about movies too much in this podcast, so that's good to know that I at least have an agreement with somebody about movies on this podcast. Anyway, so Brandon, not many people out there looking at your Twitter followers know of you, so I don't know if you want to give them a little background on yourself and how you kind of came to be the Iowa Wild beat writer in chief.
Well, I guess it all started. I moved to Des Moines from London after grad school, and I was kind of at a loss about what I wanted to do. And I really enjoy hockey. It's one of my favorite sports for a multitude of reasons. But about a year ago, I started just posting in the fan post section of Hockey Wilderness because I sent an email to Second City Hockey. Unfortunately, I'm a Blackhawks fan when I was growing up, but I sent an email to them and they didn't want me, so I started fan posting on Hockey Wilderness because I got to go to Iowa Wild games and went to the player development camp, and then I just started, just kept on writing, and they finally said, hey, come on aboard. So that's kind of how I got my start with at least with Hockey Wilderness.
So you're with Hockey Wilderness, and then now you are writing some great pieces on The Athletic for the great Michael Russo. How on earth did he come to find you and get such great stuff from you, just not only covering the Iowa Wild, but also the Minnesota Wild prospects in general?
Iowa already had a prospect writer, or not a prospect writer, but a team writer in Tom Witowski who writes some great stuff. He's got, a periodical that runs, I think once a quarter, where he does player profiles and things like that. But I just started writing about things, and actually a lot of credit goes to Ryan Malone and his kind of storyline. That's where Russo kind of I first got on Russo's radar, and he basically asked me to write the same thing for The Athletic. But he got in contact with Josh Fisher, who was the head of communications at the time with the Iowa Wild. Now he's not anymore, so shout out to Josh. But he said that I'd be interested, and I definitely was, and I was looking for a paid writing opportunity, and Russo brought me aboard, and it's been a great opportunity ever since.
Covering the team this year, it's so far, kind of on paper their best season so far since the move to Iowa, and it's really hard to believe this is the 5th year of the Iowa Wild, and it seems like only yesterday they were still the Houston Aeros with the great crop of prospects of Granlunds and Coils and whatnot. But can you kind of give us a little bit of a rundown on the Iowa Wild this year?
It's the deepest team they've had so far. Usually with Minnesota, the trend has been get their prospects in, get a few games, and then kind of pick them up and bring them up to St. Paul. And you saw that with with the Zuckers and the Spurgeons and all that when they were playing in Houston. But this team is different. They got some NHL talent on as well. The Kyle Rouse of the team. You had Murphy down here for a bit, who was 1 foot in the NHL, 1 foot in the AHL. But real deep, a lot of veteran talent this year. Definitely a lot of guys with some NHL experience, which is good to see, and as well as a pretty deep pool of prospects that have both draft picks and unsigned guys this season. So they've been putting it together. the early part of the season, it was, guys coming up, going down, obviously with all the injuries up in Minnesota, but with kind of a solidified roster, they've been really playing some good hockey as of late. So it's been really exciting to see a good team in Des Moines for once.
Yeah, when I was down here last month, they put up a 6th spot. I can't remember off the top of my head who was against. I want to say it was Rockford or something. They looked very sharp, and I don't know, recently they maybe hit a little bit of a rough patch, but they seem to be kind of just still treading water as they're still in a playoff spot. If that started today, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, third in the division isn't bad. Not a place that I've seen them, for a long period of time. But yeah, it's been great to see them performing well and scoring goals. That's been the biggest part of it, is about scoring goals. So, 23 games into the season, they have over 70 goals, and they only scored 182 all of last season. So, they're in a good position on offense at least, and the defense has been playing great since Lalone came in here. Defense has been kind of the thing to hang their cap on, and they've looked great. Guys playing well in their own zone, and now they're kind of trying to get the breakout portion of their game going, and they've been doing pretty well. All parts of the ice, as far as 5-on-5 and the special teams game as well.
So we got Luke Cunnin still down here in Iowa's. Joel Eriksson-Ek was recalled this past week by Minnesota and put up on the third line again. Can you kind of give a little bit of an update on how Luke Cunnin has been doing since his return to Iowa?
Well, with talking with him, for a piece with The Athletic, it's a guy that's a real dialed-in player. He's a real competitor. Captain of a World Junior squad and a first-round pick, and he's a guy that really wants to compete. So obviously, being sent down was a bit of a wake-up. I thought that he was going to be up there and stick around, but the offense just wasn't there. Since he came back down, you can see the frustration. But him playing along with Eriksson-Ek was pretty good. You see a lot of crisp passing. Clues kind of suffered because of it as far as his offense goes. But he's putting goals together, and now he's going to have the opportunity to be the guy again with Eriksson-Ek back up in Minnesota.
Is there anyone out there that's playing really well right now that fans up in Minnesota may not overly know too much about on the Iowa Wild?
You know what? I think a lot of people really enjoy looking at stat lines, and they think that's the end-all, be-all of players. But I'm a huge fan of Nick Seeler. I think that he plays one of the best games that I've seen in his own zone. He's physical, big-body guy, does well in front of the net, playing against opposing forwards, and guy's a puck magnet. I don't think I've seen any, they don't record block shots in the A like they do, in other leagues, but he's always blocking shots. He's always has an active stick. He's always playing well in the corners and in front of the net. And I think that's a guy that, despite his 5 assists, that he's a guy that you should probably think about as far as a potential shutdown D-man.
Well, that's funny you bring that up because Minnesota really having struggles on their third defensive pairing this year, and it really got bad a couple weeks ago that Bruce Boudreau called down to Derek Lalonde and kind of asked or got his input on what defensemen maybe are worthy of a call-up, and we saw Murphy got the call, but you mentioned maybe Seeler maybe next time if they ever really needed that. Would that be something in his future?
I'd like to see him get some minutes in the NHL for sure. He's a draft pick, so you kind of want to see how well you're drafting in the later rounds. I think he's a 5th-round guy, so as far as defensive talents, he's a great defender. The only knock against him is that he's not an offensive guy. So he's not a Dumba, he's not a Murphy, he's not even a Spurgeon. So you'd like to see him get a little bit more points and a little bit more time on special teams. He's not a big power play guy right now, but he's getting more minutes, and he's actually getting paired quite a bit with Brendan Menell, who's been getting a lot of buzz since PDC. So I think that he's definitely worth looking at as far as a call-up to get some minutes, especially because he's waivers exempt. So he's a guy you can bring up and put back down if you need a guy in a pinch.
You mentioned he was a 5th-round pick, and the Wild don't exactly have the greatest history with 5th-round picks, and I'm hoping that at some point there will be a 5th-round pick that breaks that curse. I'm not sure if we want to call that the Elo curse, or maybe now the Kaprizov curse. Looks like his relationship with the Iowa Wild's a little bit frayed. And you kind of wrote about him a couple weeks ago on the Athletic. Maybe not just more of an update, but what's kind of going on with that?
Well, with Kaprizov, it's an interesting situation because you have that Russian stigma attached to it, where he's over there and he's making his rubles and he's playing really well. He's a point per game player, but I don't know. It's just an interesting mix of one, geopolitics, and actually what he actually wants to do as far as player development. He's very talented. It's clear, but he left a pretty scathing remark about how Minnesota didn't do their part to kind of talk to him, and a Great World Junior Championship where we had Minnesota. When I say we, I say Minnesota had 3 captains. Sweden, USA, and Russia. But I get worried. I get worried that he's getting a little bit restless as far as the relationship between Russia and the United States. But the addition of his agent, or at least he's rumored to be signing with Milstein or Milstein. I can't remember how to say it, but that's a guy who's a huge Russia component. He's represented guys like Artemi Panarin for the Blackhawks. He's represented Datsuk. He's represented Kucherov. So he seems to be the guy that will get a Russian talent over to the States. And I think that if you're really looking to see Kaprizov make his move over here, that's a good step in the right direction.
That'd be a good sign for the Wild to hopefully just at least make some kind of contact with him and say, hey, yeah, we do actually value you, and we would like to see you come over, and we want to give you meaningful NHL minutes, because can we show you our bottom 6 right now?
Well, yeah. The thing is too is that a lot of people have pointed to the fact that the Wild finally got a Russian scout, and that was kind of the end-all be-all as far as establishing a relationship. But with that quote coming out saying, and it might just be the English major in me looking at the quote, but, he said that Minnesota failed in the communication, but he's still open to playing in the NHL as opposed to playing in Minnesota. So Minnesota does have the rights as far as I understand it, but it's good to see that he's picking an agent that'll have that communication bridge built up again when it looks like it kind of got broken down for a bit.
Couple more questions before we let you go. You haven't been around Iowa Wild that long, but do you have any kind of neat stories from behind the scenes that you can share? Like, I know we had Chad Graff on, and he shared a story of finding Ilya Bryzgalov in a Pittsburgh bar with Michael Russo, and Briz started talking about Russian politics, or Evan Spohr talked about how Ryan Suter fed him the day after Yom Kippur, and he hadn't eaten in 30 some odd hours. And do you have anything along those lines, maybe from the Iowa Wild yet?
Nothing that extravagant at the moment. I wish that I had more stories. It's still my first season, so I'm hoping to have one of those watershed moments as far as talking with the player. I've had a lot of embarrassing situations for myself where, I feel like with Coach Lalonde, he knows hockey more than I ever will in my entire life. So every once in a while he twists the knife when I ask him a dumb question. But besides that, or even just recently where I confused Nicholas Fedberg, our goalie, with Mario Lucia. But
literally happened seconds before we started recording here.
Yeah, when I put my foot in my mouth, I guess it's more embarrassing stories on my end, less about running into players or things like that.
Well, if they keep letting me come down here and write some stories on the Iowa Wild, it's only going to be a matter of time before my foot gets in my mouth, because I'm notorious for that, and I have 126-odd podcast history of showing that. But last 2 questions for Brandon here before we let him go. And they are our trademark Giles and the Goalie podcast questions. The first of which is, we ask every guest, Ben and I are big Jersey fans, as we talk about it every week. But do you have a favorite hockey jersey of all time, or if you are like us and can't narrow it down to one, do you have a Mount Rushmore of hockey jerseys?
We'll go with the Mount Rushmore because there's a few. Obviously the Whale, best jersey in sports as far as I'm concerned. Everybody when Vegas unveiled theirs, Wyshynski and all those guys went off about negative space, but I think the Whalers kind of set the tone as far as having negative space. But the colors as well, green and blue and the white, and it looked great. And I don't know, that's one of my favorite sweaters. But I think Frölunda in the Swedish League has a really great one. Michigan State, when they have the script, those are pretty great ones as well. And then as far as maybe an obscure one, I'd have to say...
we are very 90s centric on this podcast, so if you pull one of the odd ducks out of the 90s, we'll go nuts for that.
Well, I know you and I have talked about the Burger King sweater from the Kings. That's a good one, as well as the Gorton's Fisherman. But actually, when I was growing up, the Hawks weren't on TV, as people know famously for dollar bill words. But I don't understand why the New Jersey Devils got rid of the green. I really enjoy the green trim on the NJD sweaters, but that's just harkening back, I guess, to the mid '90s there.
Yeah, I did as well, and I can't speak for Ben, but him and I do share very similar thoughts on jersey, so that's definitely something we would have liked to seen come back, and it did a few years ago when they were in their stadium series. But yeah, and then our last question, and this is the one that gets most reaction out of our guests, is we can reference you to the Craig Custance podcast from a couple months ago when he just straight savaged Ben. But is soup a meal?
Are we counting stew as soup?
Boy, this is where Ben comes in handy because he has the guidelines for soup, and I just kind of let him talk about the guidelines. So I want to say no, but I will have to clarify this when I record with him tomorrow. But I would say, like, it's weird because there's like chili, and then I don't know.
I don't consider. I don't think I would consider.
Chili's not a soup. It
just
I don't know. Stew is almost like maybe its own classification, but I don't know.
So I guess as a person who camps from time to time, I'm a big Dinty Moore fan. If stew is part of the conversation, so I would say that's definitely a meal. A nice big can of Dinty. But I don't know. As a kid, broccoli cheddar soup, maybe a little bit of bread, that counted as a meal. But you know what? I usually use soup as kind of like a dipping vessel for sandwiches. So maybe a side more than an actual meal. I guess it just depends on the quantity and the volume of soup that you're getting.
Kind of depends maybe what it is. And all right, and I don't know, we've certainly had some interesting answers to this, and yeah, I'm sure Ben will get a full reaction out of this on the podcast. But so yeah, Brandon, is there anything you want to plug before we let you go?
Yeah, I write for Hockey Wilderness. They got me my start, so always check out that website. I'm sorry to plug another Minnesota blog on there for you, but
we're all friends now.
All right, well, that's good. As long as we're friends, yeah. Hockey Wilderness, check it out. DSM_captive is the name that I write under, and then you can also check out my stuff on the Athletic, Athletic Minnesota. So, yeah, check it out.
A lot of good stuff there going on in the Athletic and at Hockey Wilderness. Yep. So, Brandon, thanks for joining us, and we'll have you on again sometime.
I hope so. I appreciate it.
Hey, this is Nate Wells. And this is Drew Cove. Check out our podcast, that Go for Hockey podcast, for the latest news and updates on University of Minnesota hockey. You can find us on iTunes, and we're also on the Zone Coverage Podcast Network. That's elite.
Thanks to Brandon for hopping on with us, catching him in the bowels of Wells Fargo Arena a few minutes before Saturday night's Iowa Wild game. Which, boy, I gotta tell you, that was a hockey game that nobody needed to see again. The Wild were up 3-1 in the third, and, like, honestly, they should not have been up 3-1, and Svedberg had kind of made some big saves, but the Wild were just getting dominated in puck possession, and San Diego tied it. Eric Fair, an old warhorse, had a couple goals, and then, sure enough, in overtime, a great back check on a breakaway by, I can't think of the defenseman's name, but basically San Diego had a breakaway. The Iowa defenseman made an incredible back check in the defensive zone to get the guy, but Svedberg came out to try and, like, cut that off. And so what happened was the two players ran into Svedberg, so all three players are just laying on the ice and then following the play and then just getting the drifting puck and firing it into an empty net was who else but Ryan White.
I'm honestly surprised Ryan White is playing in North America. That's how bad he was last year.
Like, I guess I'm not surprised that, like, some of these old, like, NHL guys are, like, playing for San Diego. Like,
Right.
it just makes sense. Like, yeah, I want to keep playing hockey, and if I have to play in the AHL, I'm gonna play in San Diego where it's
Right.
nice. Like, I'm not gonna go play in,
Iowa.
fucking Grand Rapids or Iowa, or unless you're Ryan Malone.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the big thing out of there was he kind of caught me off guard with the stew question, which I kind of was like, yeah, Ben basically has all the rules on soup.
Well, I don't, but
So,
all right.
I mean, do you view stew as a soup, or is that kind of in its own little like classification?
It kind of is in its own because they're contend to, like, I feel like stews can vary, and I think soup, the definition of soup should be like a majority of broth. You know what I mean? Like, it's more liquid than anything. Whereas stews, I feel like it really walks that line. So you've got some stews that are very brothy, some stews that are almost no liquid whatsoever. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
I feel like stews kind of toe the line, but I will say I'm not a big stew fan. Are you? I've just never had a stew where I'm like, God damn, that was good stew. You know what I mean? Like, it's always like, okay, well, that was edible. Like.
See, I love Booyah, which I think is very, very close to the stew category.
Sure.
But otherwise, I'm not a big stew guy. So
Yeah, just like it seems like you're using cheap cuts of meat because that's what you do in a stew, and you've got your typical aromatic vegetables, and it's just kind of like there, like, I don't know, maybe that's a challenge to myself. I need to make a delicious stew. I'm sure they're out there. I've tasted delicious things that I never thought to be delicious before. I'm sure they're out there, but just like 98% of the time, I am not excited to eat a stew.
Well, we'll move on from that, but I'm sure we'll come back to that at some point because we always ask our guests about soup, so I'm sure it'll.
And they always manage to find the gray area too. We're like, hey, do you think soup's a meal? And they're like, well, I mean, what about chili? It's just like, it's not the question, man. Like, and then Brandon brings up stew, and it's like, well, okay, we're like kind of diverting a little bit, but I mean, that's I think it's a fair question. It's just not exactly what we're going for.
All right. So our listener question, which we're actually getting a lot of good feedback from, so I think we're gonna keep trying this, and then maybe do like a mailbag, once a month. But I think just kind of having the general listener question seems to be doing pretty well, particularly this week.
Yeah.
With our expansion
particularly
question.
in Texas.
Yeah. But before we dive into that, we did have last week's question with the outdoor game that was again lost in our audio problem. But basically we had a few interested, a few really not interested, and the teams were like your Vegas or Nashville, and I think you had mentioned Nashville as a host for an outdoor game, and
Yeah.
I threw it. I'd really love to see a game in the Horseshoe in Columbus.
Yeah,
But,
absolutely.
That doesn't sound like it's going to ever happen,
No.
regrettably. So basically, we just came to the conclusion we can just continue to expect Chicago and Pittsburgh for the next ever. So
And I don't know if I think this was lost as well, but there was a good suggestion of having Winnipeg and the Wild play in Duluth, which I thought was a very
that was
neat
very
idea.
good. Yeah.
Probably not anything that's going to happen anytime soon.
No, the NHL will
but
never
still,
do that.
probably a very neat idea.
Not in my lifetime.
Right.
But so this week's listener question, as we dove into the very topical expansion discussion, which city would you like to see the NHL expand to as the 32nd team in the league, Seattle or Houston? And I don't know, you and I are maybe a little different on this. Let you have the floor first.
Yeah, when we talked about this, Seattle's whole thing came up, and I think Seattle will be a good market. Don't get me wrong. I just, I don't know. It seems like their arena deal is kind of screwy, and I work with a guy. The main person that I work with, my work partner, is from Seattle, and he said the Key Arena is like, it was very akin to the Metrodome situation, where they had an offer from a private financer to build a stadium elsewhere, and still, due to whatever political corruption or just sheer stupidity, they decided to renovate the Key Arena. So, I mean, will that stop the NHL from going there? No, I don't think so. But it seems like they could have handled the situation better. So I kind of like Houston. Houston's been thrown around. The NHL approached the Rockets owner about going to Houston. We all know, and we have some fans that were Houston Aero fans back when they were the Wild Farm team. And Houston is the 4th biggest city in the U.S., and it's just kind of weird to me they don't have a hockey team. I get it's South Texas. I get that not a ton of natural hockey fans there. But after seeing a game in Tampa Bay last night, I still think it can work if you have a good sports fan base, which I think Houston is a pretty decent sports town. Like it's not up there with the psychosis in the Northeast, but I think it's a good enough sports town, and obviously there's more than enough population to support a team. So I would like to see the Arrows come back. Like, selfishly, that's what I'm shooting for, because I really like the Arrows logo, and I really like that they are keeping with the kind of space theme that they have in that city, which is really cool.
Don't get me wrong. Like, I think Houston is a good viable city for hockey. As you mentioned, it's the 4th biggest city in the U.S., and there would seemingly be a market there for a hockey team. But my reservation is football town, and the Astros are ever so popular right now, and
right.
So I kind of, maybe have a reservation about putting a second team in Texas. And, after going to Seattle last year and just kind of getting a first-hand view of, how that town handles its sports teams, I am all on the Seattle train. For a city that you really wouldn't expect to, maybe be so popular with sports, they come out in droves. The Seahawks, albeit an NFL team, the waiting list for Seahawks tickets is, eons long, as I found out, rivaling Green Bay. And the soccer team, the Sounders, they average 43,000 people a night for a game, which, leads Major League Soccer, or used to lead Major League Soccer until Atlanta showed up.
Right.
And that's the one that just really strikes me is, they get attached to their teams, and the Mariners are in there too, and maybe if they had somewhat competent management, they'd have a more competitive team, and they still do reasonably well with attendance. But Seattle just a great town, and really an underrated sports town, and I am all on board the NHL putting a team there. How they're going to align the divisions if and when Seattle becomes that 32nd team, I don't know. Because you're going to have, 9 teams that should be in the Pacific Division and only 7 in the Central, so somebody's got to slide over. But, I don't know. I am itching to go back to Seattle, and probably the next time that happens is when the NHL is there. So, go Seattle.
I will say, after this whole Key Arena deal went down, it does really seem like the NHL is leaning towards Seattle. And I support the whole Houston bit, but it seems like that's the direction the NHL wants to go. That's where all the buzz is, at least, is towards Seattle. And I think as far as the divisional thing goes, I think it's fairly simple to throw the Coyotes into the Central for 2 reasons. One, Arizona does not observe daylight savings time. So they're in the Mountain time zone along with Colorado for much of the hockey season.
Huh. I didn't know that.
Yep, they do not observe daylight savings time. So they flip-flop, actually. Instead of changing their clocks, they don't change their clocks. They just change what time zone they're in, which obviously takes no winding of any clocks whatsoever, which is kind of handy, I guess, but
That's really
probably
weird.
harder to keep track of. So right now, they're in the same time zone as Denver. Reason number 2, let's not pretend like the Coyotes are going to be there for very long.
Right.
And Houston seems like a pretty decent landing spot for the Coyotes, to be honest. Like, if they're going to give Seattle an expansion team, which sure, they seem like they would prefer to do that, or maybe they don't want 2 expansion teams in the same division. Maybe they want to give the expansion team to Houston with the intent that the Coyotes land in Seattle sooner rather than later, which I think either way, I think it's kind of a win. Obviously people are going to shout and holler about Quebec City, but I think there's a couple of teams on the southeastern seaboard that are maybe destined for that city. So I think when you look out west, an expansion and a relocation involving Houston and Seattle, I think it just kind of works out pretty well.
So we did open up the floor to our listeners on our social media accounts, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of which can be found at TG Wild Podcast. We did get some replies to our questions. First reply from our friend Gretchen. If Houston gets a team, can we have the Stars back from Dallas? If no, then Seattle. Brandon Warren says Minneapolis.
Yeah.
Paul Pleiss, Anchorage, Alaska.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. There's just not enough population up there, I think. Obviously I think they're hockey fans, but there's just not many people.
Besides, they already made a movie on the hockey team up there.
Right.
We heard from our friend Dave Schwartz. He says Seattle, because I feel like their population would be the most likely one to vote in favor of having Pucky McPuckface as a team mascot.
Yeah, the naming is interesting. I know ESPN did an article about Seattle, and I kind of like Greg Wyshynski's idea of the Seattle Sasquatch. It's kind of funny. The guy that I work with actually brings up this Seattle Totems, which was a minor league team for many years, and now I believe they have a junior team that's called the Totems. Not a junior league, but like a young kids league that's called the Totems. So it's an interesting name, and if you search Seattle Totems jersey, it's kind of cool. It's got kind of like a Whalers Blackhawks mashup feel to it, I will say.
At NHL Houston says Houston. No surprise there. Markman says Key West, purely for selfish reasons.
Yeah, don't hold your breath, bud.
Aaron Kelly says Seattle. Think about the built-in rivalry with Vancouver.
Yeah.
But the same could be said about Houston and Dallas.
Yep.
Let's see. Gareth Oliver, Seattle, but honestly it should be Quebec City. Kelly Riley says Houston. As a Wild fan who grew up in Houston, loved watching the Arrows and the future Wild players. Seattle will also be awesome. And then we get into the part where pretty much the state of Texas shows up. Houston. Serious mashup. Our friend says Quebec. Lorianne Siski says Houston. Now living there but grew up in Hershey, Pennsylvania. We need hockey in Houston. Lots of transplants here that know hockey. Ethan Hoffland says Milwaukee. Few more Houstons. Another Seattle. So basically, we got a good mix in there. But basically, as I kind of wrote today on zone coverage in my, trying out a Sunday column type thing, taking a page out of your book.
Uh-huh.
The NHL seems to be pretty set on going to Seattle because the ink was not dry on the agreement to renovate Key Arena, and the NHL already had its foot in the door.
Right.
So, as I also said, they'll give you the traditional, we're letting them just explore the process, blah, 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 but inside the league offices, they're going, yep, we're going to Seattle.
Right. So sorry to those fans. Hopefully they still patronize our podcast. Giles and the Goalies podcast. We're huge in Texas.
So that was our listener question for the week. Thank you to everyone for chiming in. We will have one later in the week. Again, check out our social media pages to find the next question, of which I have no idea yet. So
Sure.
on to our weekly wager.
What's your bet, sir?
Ah, yes, the bet. Okay, what the hell?
It makes very little sense to bet when you cannot win.
Well, we didn't settle this yet, correct? That's tonight's game is still on the docket for that.
True. What was it? A Dubnik shutout?
Yes. So I have one more game,
That's right.
and I missed Friday nights by one freaking goal.
How terrible. So our weekly wager from last week, as you heard, is still kind of up in the air. So we don't have a resolution on that yet. So next week we will have a resolution to that for you, and then probably one from this week, as I try to think of what we should wager on this week. Do you got any?
I
ideas?
don't know. I feel like we should bet on someone's scoring. So, do you have anyone you feel bullish on in the Wild enough to make that bet, or do you want me to make a bet on someone?
I'm going to say that I'm going to wager that Matt Dumba scores twice this week.
Oh,
goals.
Twice! Yikes!
I'm going bold.
You're bold. All right. Let's see here. To think of a good one. I think we should let the loser's girlfriend record something for the show.
Yeah?
Like, give them a free reign of like a minute.
Just a roast.
Basically.
That's fair.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you want to do that with such long odds on Dumba.
Well, I don't know. I got a lot of skeletons in my closet, so what the hell? Yeah, that's fine with me.
All right.
This is pending approval, but I'm sure it'll be just fine. Yeah, there you go.
Well, we could have them air it on the Festivus show, since that'll be kind of a call-in show anyway. They could call in to said Festivus show. So I think that works out.
There you go. All right, so that is their wager for the week. So next week we'll probably have a couple of results for you, maybe. And now to close out the show, we move on to jerseys.
Here to start the third period. What team is this? It's not Team USA. Well, yes, it is. They've got on new uniforms. They're wearing the logo of the Duck. I've never seen this before.
So the third jersey we get to discuss this week is the once again tire-firing Edmonton Oilers. And, well, Ben and I have made our feelings crystal clear on their Adidas switch.
Uh-huh.
But, I mean, third, just from a base perspective, like a third jersey has to be blue, right?
Yeah, they have to bring that blue jersey back. I mean, the blue jersey is, and part of the thing that bothers me, not just because the orange jersey doesn't look that hot, but part of the thing that bothered me the most about the whole switch to orange is how much history that blue and orange jersey has with that franchise. You know, and it just like, how do you veer away from that? Like, I just don't understand how you veer away from that. So I think if they don't, but they also made their shade of blue darker. So they're like kind of leaning back towards the, the navy and copper look that they had in the late 90s, early 2000s. So it just, I don't know. It just seems like they have to go back to a blue jersey, but I'm not really sure what blue that would be.
They'll butcher it.
Yeah.
You basically said how I feel, so I'll just I'll leave it at that. Short and sweet. Just like the Edmonton Oilers 1-year playoff run. So,
no kidding.
So there you go. That unless I forgot anything, I think that can do it for this week.
Sure.
I think we got it all. So
yeah. I will say that I went to a Tampa Bay Lightning game last night, and that was a lot of fun. And if you ever find yourself in the Bay Area down here, I would recommend it because it was a lot of fun. And it also kind of made me a little sad that Wild games are the experience that they are, and made me sad for Wild fans who endure said Wild experience. But at the same time, Wild fans are the ones kind of to blame. So, I don't know, it was just nice being at an arena where people were there to watch a sporting event versus there to shout all of their, knowledge at the players on the ice because they feel entitled, to a higher opinion because they played the game. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like I don't think that happens as much with other sports, and I could be wrong. Lord knows I don't go anywhere near an NFL game anymore. But it's just like, yeah, we get that you played hockey, but I didn't hear anyone yelling "shoot" at all last night, and it was absolutely delightful.
Yeah, that was the same thing I noticed in Los Angeles and Anaheim. Nobody yelling "shoot." Oh,
and it's just like
just pleasant on the ears.
They're there like, hey, this is our team. It's a lot of fun. The in-arena presentation is very good. And also, to the Wild's franchise fault, in deference, Tampa doesn't pander to their fans at all. They had a sellout crowd last night on a Saturday night against the Jets. And they didn't have to, pump their tires and tell them that they were the best fans in the world and that they loved the game of hockey and that no one understands how much they love the game of hockey because they're from a state that plays a lot of hockey. Like, it was just so nice to see a sporting event where the team actually presented the sporting event as the main attraction instead of the fans.
Right.
And I can't, that and they pronounce bolts with one syllable. It was fantastic.
You're all about the syllables, aren't you?
That's just my punctuation on the sentence. That's all that is.
All right. Well, that'll do it for us before we, further rant down a rabbit hole or before Ben tosses any more fireballs at Wild Twitter. You can find our lovely Otherwise Fine podcast on the social medias at GATG Wild Podcast. Find us on iTunes, Libsyn, SoundCloud, all that good stuff. Go check out our social media channels for where you can find all of it. And Ben and I write at zonecoverage.com. We are also on the Twitters at Giles Farrell, at Ben Remington. And find us talking about 90s jerseys there. So yeah, we will be back next week. I think we will both be next to each other as we record.
In the state of hockey.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Don't forget that. State of hockey, baby.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that will do it for us, and we will catch you next week.
Later.
It's not resiliency. You're making it sound like we're good. That's all. I'm done.